My name is Jamie Gleason. I'm the Director of Undergraduate and Secondary Education Initiatives at Capture Higher Ed. I am joined today by a good friend and colleague of mine, Ann Freihofer, who she'll introduce herself. A little bit about me. I've been at Capture since 2015. I have been in higher ed for about 15 years through a number of different roles on campus. And I've been at Capture, I already said that, since 2015. Ann, introduce yourself, please.
Absolutely. So my name is Ann Freihofer, very welcoming title, Senior Enrollment Solutions Consultant. Essentially what that means is I've worked with many colleges and universities across the country, helping identify some of these solutions, the right place for data and technology and recruitment. And I've been with Capture since 2012. So July will be 8 years for me. And as Jamie mentioned, we have had the pleasure of working together now for quite a few cycles. So an interesting one we have today, isn't it, Jamie, where we find ourselves?
Yes, it is. Absolutely. We find ourselves in a very interesting spot. If any of you have been paying attention to some of the material that we've been putting out, there's a little bit of a Star Wars theme going. So I decided to make a slide that was a little Star Warsy. And this is about the questions. We're obviously up against time with a 30-minute webinar. We know that you have important things to do on your campus. But what I do want to encourage is the submission of questions either through the chat box or the questions panel. And we're going to host a YouTube live event on Tuesday the 5th at 2 o'clock. There'll be a link at the end of the presentation today. We'd invite you to join us during that. That'll be a live session where we actually handle all the submitted questions from today and then also discuss them with a few people who are on the practitioner side and a few other individuals from Capture. So feel free to start shooting those in, or throughout the presentation, if you come up with an idea or a question or an idea, throw that in there and we'll discuss it on Tuesday. So here we are, everyone. The topic of today is transfer recruitment, growing and engaging transfers. Let me give an overview. Obviously, what we have here in front of us is an issue, a situation that's been very dynamic and very changing. And in September of last year, we all know that NACAC decided to change some practices and regulations. And what we saw out of that introduction, that first ripple is what I call it, was a direct impact on the transfer market. The ability to recruit at a greater level those students who maybe didn't come to your institution in the first place. So that was going to create a competitive environment, more competitive than usual. And then also the timing of the cycle was lengthened. Today, there's a second ripple added on top of that. And we're going to dig a little bit into that second ripple and what that is going to do, what it means for you right now, and actually for the next 4 months. When we were putting together the material for today, actually, and even before today, so like 6 weeks ago, we were working on and had actually published this document, or we were working on internally these series of documents called the Transfer Trilogy, which are available for download there. Those were written in a context of NACAC changes, hot transfer timing and things like that. But what we have right now is a situation that is obviously morphed and is obviously very different. So why are we at Capture uniquely suited to discuss this topic? That's a great question. Well, obviously, if you know anything about what we do here at Capture, we have in our possession a tool that we use, tools that we use that are a part of a behavioral intelligence platform. So we have the ability to watch, track, measure, and then respond to the changing dynamics that are happening both in your web environment and also in other digital spaces. To date, we've tracked 77 million, that number's gone up because I put this in a few days ago, 77 million unique visitors through our partners' websites. We work exclusively in the higher ed atmosphere, and as a result, we see a lot of traffic and we see how students are engaging what's going on. And as you know, right now, the effective channels that are out there are limited. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those things in the presentation today. But ultimately, engagement with the students that you have, the students that you're courting, that's king. So what we anticipated, in summary, we anticipated an increase in competition, a longer cycle, and increased risk of retention. But what we now face is that students are searching for options that are close to home Essentially, the recruitment, the retention cycle has been rebooted, campuses are closed, and students are all over the internet looking for options and alternatives. So here are the 5 tips. We're going to cover these in a very quick manner, just an overview, and then we'll dig in deeper as we go through. We want to make sure that today, ultimately, so my goal for every webinar that I am a part of is that even if you're not a capture partner, that you can walk away and think, oh, there's some things here that I can do, some changes I can make, some things I can put practically into motion. And that's my goal today. And obviously we're gonna talk a little bit about some of the tactics that we employ as well with our partners. So the first thing, as any good counselor would say, the first thing that you need to do when you're up against something that's different is embrace the reality. And I don't know what your embrace has looked like, but recently for me, it has been filled with statistics and webinars and all sorts of noise, lots of noise about like what people are putting out there in the market and what's coming back and what students are saying and how parents are going to react and yada, yada, yada. Like there is no shortage of survey material that's out there. And actually the Chronicle wrote an article that was very interesting because it talked about, don't worry if there's the survey doesn't tell you what you want now, don't worry, there's a couple more that are going to be published tomorrow that you'll get something else from. The big takeaway is that there's a big takeaway. There are lots of things that are going out there, and ultimately the group of students that you're courting has spoken and they're continuing to speak. But how do you make sense of all this noise? It's difficult to understand where we land on it. But here's, here in summary are some of the things that I think are most critical. This chart is telling us that finances are going to impact our enrollment in fall 20. We all know this. We also know that even if this situation clears up, students are still going to be looking. The data is telling us that. There are at least 20% that are considering transfer options, and this is happening across the United States. It's not just your community, it's not just that other side of the country, it's happening everywhere. And as a result, what we need to be able to do is analyze what's happening and respond to what's happening. So here's the thing, is it an opportunity or a threat? Well, yes, it is. It's both. I feel like some days I wake up and I think, okay, what can we do? This is an amazing opportunity that's in front of us. We may never get a cycle that's like this before. And then there are other days that I wake up and I'm like, this is really hard. And that's okay. Just so you know, if you're listening out there, that's okay to feel that way. In short, really the truth of what's happening is that we are going to be playing an Ironman game of football for the next 4 months. Not only are we going to be defending the current students that we have, the current students that we want to make sure that we retain, but we also have this unprecedented opportunity to be looking for students who might be looking for those closer to home options. And it's amazing like what this can do on a campus. Anne gets a lot of time to speak with our partners, prospective partners, and people who are out there in the field. And I know that for her, she's got something to say about that last bullet point.
Sure. So in the 8 years that I've been working with institutions, I would say that I've heard the transfer moment across all of our partners, across every college and university that I've spoken with. And the resonating theme is that, my goodness, it's just so hard for us to figure out the best way to recruit transfer students and to be essentially, and I'll quote a very good friend in the industry, omnipresent. How do I know what to tell a transfer at what time and the way to be there all the time? How do I make this a priority? So it's one thing to prioritize outreach to the prospective student. It's another thing to look at changing things internally. So the way that maybe you handle a transfer student process and the way that you engage colleagues on campus. What I would say today is what I've heard all of our partners and institutions say is that, yes, this is a priority. Instead of being 1E or 1D, what I would encourage, and what Jamie, I think you're saying as well, is that we've got to move this type of strategy up to 1A and 1B. And right now, a time that we've never really been able to embrace in our industry is just copious amounts of change. So be brave and try something different, because the worst thing that could happen is that you could figure out that you've got great talent on campus that can really resonate with the transfer population.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that this is absolutely the time to put into practice some tactics that maybe you've been putting off, and hopefully we'll hit on some of those today. And you just mentioned like this bigger concept, right? So I'm gonna, like I said earlier, this webinar is going to contain both practical strategy, but then there's some of the other bigger pieces here. And this next tip is one of those bigger ones. This is one of those like big mountain moving kind of think globally tips. And I would say whenever we can, our goal as enrollment officers is to reduce the friction. And that friction comes in a variety of sorts. And I think transfers actually present a very unique group of students that often have a lot of friction, right? They know what they're not looking for. They know how much they're willing to pay. They know the experiences that they need. But the truth is sometimes our processes on campus aren't exactly the best for them. The clearinghouse says that the average transfer student loses 40% of their credits, which is a tragedy. Finances, we all know this, and again, my time as an enrollment leader on a campus, we all know that when you bring a student in for an interview of why are they leaving, one of the first things that they say, if it's not the first thing, it's near the top, is like, well, I'm just looking for a more affordable solution. And the other thing that's this bigger part of this puzzle that we're in right now is that transfer programs need to be hireable. They need to be those things that are can move right into the job market. They're obviously going to have less time on your campus, but they're going to want to leave with the skills and the tools and the degree under the program that actually can get them hired. And we all know, like just by looking at job statistics in the labor market right now, like these are changing presently. And I would say, if you have the ability on your campus right now to start a conversation, whether it's with a registrar or with a department or a school, to change one of these things, even if it's just a little bit. Now, and this is where I can be this big global optimist sometimes, and I can think big and be idealistic, and I want to be idealistic, but the truth is, it's like if you can move the needle just a little bit on one of these things, if you have that in your capability, then you should do that. Things like a pre-application transcript evaluation. If your school still says, hey, this student needs to be fully applied before we're going to evaluate what they're going to get for credits, then maybe you can visit that. Maybe you can boost your transfer scholarship model a little bit, or add a Phi Theta Kappa scholarship. Maybe you can, there are ways to bring in more credits for certain programs. And again, I just want to reiterate, the idealist in me knows these are big, heavy pieces of content. They take a long time. Often they're steeped in tradition and red tape. But if you have the ability to move any of those, then do that. Please do that for the sake of the transfers that are actually now looking at you. Tip number 3, boost your pool. We've all seen this old school, the way in old school how we have built transfers. It's often gravity pipeline, organic. We visit college campuses, we foster those relationships. We take the student clearinghouse data of the app and admits that go to 2 years, and we put it in there. We do things by the book, and usually for a lot of institutions, this has been enough to grow the transfer population in a year-over-year manner that is good enough, right? It's good enough. If we stop and step back and think about what good enough might be this year, it could be very different. And the goal is obviously to make it significantly different. And for those of you who are looking at the Where's Waldo and wondering, why do I have Where's Waldo there? Because obviously Where's Waldo is a lot like we have done transfer enrollment. It's kind of like this: look around, see if you find the right person. And for those who are really, really looking and getting close to their monitor right now, I'll give you a little help. That's where Waldo is, right there. The good news about where we are in this new paradigm is that the changes in NACAC do introduce a lot of potential possibilities for boosting the pool. There are lots of ways that we can bring in some students. We can help reach out to them. And what I would say is, many of you might be already doing these, and that's great. And if you are already doing this, and this is the recommendation or the thing that you've been doing, that's great. And even on the previous slide, if you haven't been doing those things with moving the clearinghouse data into your pipeline, if you haven't been looking at, if you have articulation agreements and bringing those graduates from the community colleges into your pipeline, into your CRM, then do that. There are ways to build that pool. And this, of all cycles to do it, this is the time when you want to have a bigger pool and grow that out. we at Capture are making these recommendations. You know, previous to fall and spring cohorts of non-matriculated admits, melted deposits, applicants, you know, obviously those students you want. And then there's this other group of like high propensity inquiries. And I got into a conversation with a colleague the other day about like, well, you know, what's the likelihood that an inquiry that maybe comes and visits campus and does this or that, you know, is actually going to be looking at you for a transfer in? Well, I think maybe normally it might not be that high, but this is not a normal year. The other thing is that in light of this pandemic, you know, there are lots of new seekers that are out there and they're looking for material. They're looking for your website for guidance. They're looking to your professionals for like, how do I do this? Does it make sense? All that kind of thing. And there are other tools digitally that you can use in order to bring this pool to a higher level, which right now, this has traditionally been the biggest roadblock with transfer students, right? Is the ability to create a quality pool. And there are tools available at your disposal that actually can help find those students that are looking at you right now and identify who they are. Tip number 4, amplify your reach. Okay, let's channel a little bit here back to number 1, embracing the transition. So the clarity we need right now is that last month's campaigns aren't going to work today. Hopefully you've realized that, and hopefully if you're listening today, it's because you've actually already you've already changed a little bit, you've already done something slightly different, or you're starting to make some pivots to kind of set you up for the next 4 months. But if you haven't already, you need to, and let this be the clarion call that changes must be made in order for you to be successful for your transfer. Again, data overload, right? There's a whole bunch of data in here, but what I wanted to emphasize with this shifted presence and the tools that are being used right now is that the way that you're going to augment the reach is by getting in front of the students who want to be, who you need to be in front of. More so than ever, the blue graph on the lower right, or on the lower left, is my absolute favorite because it shows, you know, over the last, 6 months from Q3 in 2019 to March 2020, the screen time, the time in front of like your device is up by a massive percentage, from 10 hours to 13 and a quarter hours a day. Like, that is a lot of time for the average 18 plus. And for those of you who are in the adult space or in graduate, like, these are things to know because this is where the audience is going to be found. Students right now are in this state because they're doing online class. They're in this always on. Mobile activities up, web's up, socials up. It's all up, and it's grown a ton in the last 45 days. I mean, here's the thing, even Verizon is telling us that the average call duration is up 15%. So even those old methods of outreach, picking up the phone, I have 3 kids, and like telling them to make a phone call is like telling them you're going to go to the dentist, and they just don't want to do it. It's like, no, I don't want to talk to that person on the phone. But it's like, even these old methods of outreach, like picking up the phone and having a call, those things are going to be even more successful in the environment. The big takeaway here is that if you're not in front of the students digitally right now, then you're missing out. You are missing out on an optimal time to be putting ads, to building your value proposition, getting out in front of these students. And the good news is that costs are down because there's so much more traffic. The cost per impression when it comes to digital ads has gone down, so you get more impressions for your dollar. That's a good thing. Here's out with the old and in with the new, right? We all know, hopefully we know by now, community colleges are closed. So GeoIP targeting campaigns that are being deployed on community colleges right now are pretty much being met with zeros. Maybe like the essential services team that's there. You're not visiting campuses, you're not making appointments, you're not having instant decision days on your campus, but there are very viable alternatives. And in fact, I would say there are alternatives that are even better. Let's just take, for instance, the top 2 bullets on the right, household IP targeting and social prospecting, and compare them to GeoIP targeting on the left. GeoIP targeting goes to a particular location, anyone who's on that location. So if it's a student who's in her 60s versus a student who's maybe 19 years old and thinking about transferring, both of those students are going to get deployed that ad. However, if you do a social prospecting ad, you can actually build a profile that is very much in the wheelhouse of, hey, this is the type of student that I want to look for. You know, a nursing student who lives within 5 miles of this particular area or 10 miles of this particular area. But there's other things that are out there, options. Hopefully you're already employing some of these things, virtual group events, that you're doing web retargeting on your website and getting those students back who maybe have come and seen what you have to offer, but they haven't yet taken the step. They haven't moved forward in the pipeline. And these are the digital alternatives that are at your disposal right now that actually have huge value. And the fifth bullet on the right there, tracking and marketing automation, this is really what Capture does most. But we also do a lot of the other digital work that feeds people into your website atmosphere, so we can actually we can have attribution toward what they're doing. We can understand, hey, what ad made the difference for them, or what event like was the thing that pulled them in. These are all tactics that hopefully, you know, in the next 4 months, you'll have the opportunity to stand up at least a few campaigns that you can be proactive in making the outreach. And last but not least, obviously what we want to do is be strategic, right? We all know this is an atmosphere where budgets are shrinking, staff might be shrinking. There are lots of things. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of uncertainty on your campus. In truth, there are a very limited number of levers that we can pull when it comes to transfers. And this is traditionally very true, right? There's very few things that we can do to build that pool. The NACAC changes have actually boosted that potential. And as a result of that, what we need to be doing is taking advantage of those changes, but then also leveraging things that we need to also put in place. Now, before you click off, before you exit the webinar, because I put the word predictive model on there, I want you to just listen, because you know, there's been a lot of talk about the reliability of predictive modeling right now, and obviously transfers represents a very small subset of traditional students, and sometimes that makes their, you know, the ability to build a model very different. I want to acknowledge that, you know, predictive modeling right now is very wonky, but as I talk to data science folks, including those who are on our staff team, better to use a predictive model in a time of uncertainty than to use nothing at all. Better to base it on something that you've seen historically be successful than on something that is, you know, based largely in whether it's like internal gut wrench or gut check, and you know, I think that's going to work, or you know, use a predictive model. Use the locations that are given, some of the profile details that are given, in order to drive the bigger strategies of your plan. And then maximize website data and engagement. This is, you know, as we've seen, you know, through both the graphs that I've already talked about, if you've watched statistics and if you know what's going on your website, students are up. We are seeing them show up, and they're coming back, obviously after some downtime, but this is the time to use it. So here's my science lesson. And for those of you who are listening who I've have been partners with in the past, one of the things that I have always liked to use is the idea of potential energy and kinetic energy, because they both have a place. And just bear with me if I'm not a science guy, but I stole this slide from some science teacher. In my eyes, the use of a predictive model really is a way to maximize the potential energy of the audience that you have. So think about it right now. You have a current pool. You might have a lead pool that was building through this cycle, and you have some digital ad dollars to spend. That predictive model is going to help you figure out who's the targeted group that I need to get those ads in front of. How do I use the data points from our predictive model in order to help inform the profile that I want to build, so that I can build a lead generation tool out there on social media? And how can I drive email comms? How can I pick the people that are going to receive the messaging from me? Those are all things that the predictive model can help with. Web engagement, on the other hand, is the active. These are the people who are already on your site. They're already looking to get information. They need you to respond back to them. So this is a perfect way to personalize communication. It's a great way to figure out, how do I mitigate, you know, if it's a student who's looking somewhere or looking at like a select bit of information, you can help inform the conversation, and you can mitigate a potential exit, or you can help them, with a financial question that's going on, or you can simply help them move forward in the funnel. You can get them to take that next step and become a student on your campus in the fall. Here's a couple of very simple examples that we have put into place on the transfer side. The one on the left is a progressive identification form. So we use these for anonymous students who are visiting a website. We obviously don't know who they are, but we put this up there in front of them in order to move them forward. So for many of you, this is very similar to an RFI form or an inquiry form that you might have on your website, but the difference is this shows up right in front of that student. We like to make sure that we're drilling down and figuring out who exactly this should go to. So making sure that that's in front of a student who's clicked a couple of times on a transfer URL, so that we can drive them toward the transfer process. And then the one on the left or the right, the dynamic content toaster. This is just one of many forms that we have, many tools that we have in order to take an existing audience that you've seen before. Maybe someone who is in a fall 18 campaign or a fall 19 campaign, but they're back on your website, and say, hey, this is a potential student that's looking to transfer. We identified them back when they were incoming freshmen, but they never matriculated. This is a great way to do that. Overall, again, just to emphasize the fact that this isn't new for us, Capture's tracked 429 million students, users, page views with our partners over the last 10 years. So this is our wheelhouse. This is what we do. And these are the ways, these 5 tips are just little ways that little things we can do in order to get back in front of the audience that's going to be so critical for this year. So we've gone through all this material. Now what, Ann? Now what do we do?
Great question, Jamie. So again, another question that I hear all the time, and how do we know? What should we do with this information? How are we going to be able to be in front of folks? I certainly don't want to create more data fatigue, but in a release that we did last week in a new blog from John Foster on our data science team, I found this particular graph to be rather fascinating. We saw a lot of the same downtick in terms of activity that a lot of our partners did. Student activity going down, people going away, people kind of being quiet. We experienced that between February and the beginning of March, and then through March, like a lot of our partners did. But the good news is that we've already surpassed activity from this time last year in terms of 2020 over 2019. So the time is now. Those students and their stakeholders, whether it be from a transfer perspective or just recruitment in general, are looking for information, and they're coming to your websites for it. And we know that because we can measure it. So not only does our data go back as far as just what we're facing this year, but we're talking about years of historical analysis that we've done to help institutions have tools that they can rely on. So yes, data has changed, and we are in a new frontier. But we have a lot of confidence at Capture, and certainly we feel confident in our tools. But as long as you are using things as enrollment managers that give you the ability to measure and convert, you are on the right track. That's for sure.
Absolutely. And to pull in a quote from one of my favorite movies, what this graph tells me is that, yes, they are re-engaging. So for those of you who are Top Gun fans, great scene out of Top Gun. Maybe you should consider watching that tonight. Since we all know there's a limited things to do. All right, I want to thank you, everyone. We are perfectly on time today. Thank you so much for attending. Just a couple of reminders. Our event on Tuesday will handle any questions that have come in during the webinar today, and some other material that's related to transfer. Also, if you have a couple of minutes, hit that Transfer Trilogy link, and you can download those data points. There's the 3 titles that are given there on the right. It's been our pleasure today to have you with us. We hope that you are staying safe, and we're looking forward to helping you get through this. We'll see you soon.